everyone. I hope you're having a great week. Happy Thanksgiving to those who practice. For this week's video, I am in my faux art historian office, as you can see, to give a little history lesson on an artist named Hung Liu, who was born and raised in China, but who spent her adult life making art in the Bay Area. And more specifically, I'm going to be talking about her piece called Resident Alien, which she made in 1988. And there's a massive version of this piece that I saw at the De Young Museum in Golden Gate Park. And I think this piece is a perfect fit for our project because it explores sort of how art can be used to challenge both political and artistic agendas and create a sense of solidarity between cultures, which is something we're really interested in on Art in Action. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about who Hung Liu is, her life in communist China, her move to the United States, and how those experiences play out in Resident Alien. All right, let's get into it, baby. So Hung Liu was born in 1948 in Changchun, China. And as a child, she bore witness to a lot of widespread poverty and famine that ensued under the communist regime. And for those who aren't familiar, a little bit about the Communist Party and how they rose to power. In the beginning of the 1900s, the dynastic system in China, which had been in operation for thousands of years, collapsed. Civil war broke out between the two major political parties at the time, and those were the nationalists and the communists. And the communists were ultimately victorious, and their leader, or one of the leaders, Mao Zedong, established the People's Republic of China in 1949. And he promised to create a sort of democratic dictatorship where the working class would be afforded all these new freedoms. The nation was predicted to flourish through the redistribution of land and other methods for industrialization that mirrored those used in the Soviet Union at the time. However, these efforts actually catalyzed immense poverty, unchecked abuse of power, and the execution of thousands of citizens who were believed to defy the Communist Party. And in fact, Liu's own father was one of the people who was arrested because he was part of the Nationalist Party, and she actually did not see him again until 1994. So Liu herself was sent to a military farm for re-education during the Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s, but she was eventually able to enroll in the Central Academy of Fine Art in Beijing, where she was mostly interested in mural painting and oil painting. And the Communist Party believed that art exists to serve the masses, or in other words, to promote the communist agenda. And so Liu was afforded very little artistic freedom. And instead, she was instructed in the style of socialist realism, which was essentially developed to reflect communist values through these very highly idealized depictions of the working class. And as Liu explains in an interview, while I was in China, artists were expected to be the tools of propaganda. Abstract and individualistic paintings were not acceptable in schools or in public exhibitions. So it was this lack of artistic freedom that inspired her to move to the United States to study art at the University of California, San Diego. And after waiting 4 years to receive her passport, she moved there in 1984. In 1988, Liu made Resident Alien for an installation at the Cap Street Project Art Gallery in San Francisco. She had been studying photographs of Chinese immigrants and wanted to create a piece that connected their own plight to her experience as an immigrant. And Resident Alien is based off the artist green card with some very key modifications. So firstly, Liu's name has been changed to Fortune Cookie, and her birthday on the piece states the day she arrived in the United States, not her actual date of birth. And then the image of Liu in the left-hand corner is a portrait of the artist rendered in oil paint, rather than just a government official photograph. So finally, and perhaps most obviously, the piece has been created with very large proportions, stretching almost 8 feet wide and 5 feet tall, which is a very far cry from the green card size that you can put in your wallet. And the one I saw took up like a whole wall in the entryway of the museum, so like very, very large. So the transition from a Chinese and a communist context to an American one sparked immense culture shock for Liu, and she had come from a country with very strict parameters for what art could be, and was suddenly experiencing this boom of postmodernism in the West, which was seeking to deconstruct the very building blocks of what art and art history had been up until that point. And it was grappling with where she fit in within these two contexts that were colliding. That's what became the focal point of her work. And as the scholar Alison Reef writes, Liu challenges and reinterprets existing social and cultural conventions so as to forge her own personal and artistic identity. And this is really what you see playing out in Resident Alien, and that's what I'm going to talk about with you guys today. So one way that Liu manipulates the artistic practices that were used to idealize figures in power is through the size of the piece. So the large proportions parody the giant murals that were created to promote the communist agenda, as well as the large-scale history paintings and portraits made to venerate figures of the aristocracy throughout Western history, both in Europe and the United States. In this way, she's sort of paying homage to those that were most affected by these figures, by this abuse of power, and she's literally and symbolically placing their experience sort of on the same level as these political figures, both in the East and West. Furthermore, by addressing the subject of immigration, Liu is bringing awareness to the widespread suffering and displacement that took place under the communist regime, rather than presenting the sort of idealized version of circumstances at the time, which is what you see in socialist realism. For example, in the piece Chairman Mao Inspects the Guangdong Countryside, which was made in 1972 by Chen Yanning, laborers sort of crowd joyfully around the leader, and he leads them across this road like a kind of glorified prophet. But the workers' smiling faces and the lush greenery that surrounds them is a very far cry from the reality of starvation that many citizens experience at this time in history. So Liu continues to challenge the artistic conventions of the Communist Party via her self-portrait on the left-hand side of Resident Alien, which was inspired by a photo of the artist. And under Mao, artists were discouraged from making art based on photographs, and they were instead instructed to use live models. Not only that, but Liu's family and many other families at the time were forced to burn their family albums because owning them boasted of an economic status that threatened their safety during a time when like the working class was so glorified and it was not cool to have money. With this history in mind, building a body of work from photographs based on photographs became a way for Liu to address and sort of symbolically reverse the collective loss of memory caused by the violence and destruction of property that took place under the regime. And throughout her career, Liu used a technique that's called weeping realism, which is where she would pour linseed oil over paintings that had been based on photographs. There's a quote from an exhibition curator, Dorothy Moss, who says that the textures created by weeping realism become reminders of the passage of time. They add a layer of empathy, they create emotion. Making work based on photographs like this offers an antidote to this destruction of family history and memory, while also acknowledging the ongoing impact of the political corruption and violence that led to such destruction of property. Photography also acted as a way for Liu to draw parallels between the plight of Chinese immigrants, such as herself, and instances of displacement within the United States. One artist she took inspiration from was Dorothy Lang, who documented the migration of families that were uprooted during the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. And once again, Liu is playing with this notion of linear time and transcending the sort of geographical and temporal boundaries of history. And in doing so, she's forging this sense of solidarity between cultures. This is in part made possible because of her own complicated relationship with identity as an immigrant. Something she addresses in Resident Alien by using the alias Fortune Cookie, which replaces her real name. And in an interview, she explains that much like her, the fortune cookie is, quote, hybrid. It exists between cultures. It's not Chinese and it's not American. The same sense of hybridity is what prompts Liu to draw connections between Western and Eastern history, art, and the inherited and generational trauma that people from both contexts have experienced. Her art invites the viewer to look at these experiences from a place of empathy as well as solidarity. So I also wonder, and I was thinking about this when researching this piece, is to what extent Liu's choice to replace the photo on her green card with a self-portrait done in paint also defies the sort of dehumanizing gaze of the United States immigration system. In On Photography by Susan Sontag, she talks about how the camera acts as this kind of barrier between the artist and the subject. And in doing so, it allows the artist to capture the subject from a very safe distance while rendering them sort of exposed under the camera's very intrusive gaze. She writes that, quote, "There is something predatory in the act of taking a picture. To photograph people is to violate them, by seeing them as they never see themselves, by having knowledge of them they can never have, turns people into objects that can be symbolically possessed." So I wonder to what extent the unfeeling gaze, or the sort of removed gaze of the camera, mirrors the kind of unfeeling nature of the immigration system, which is a system that holds the future of so many people's lives in its hands, which is something that's so emotional and so personal. And at the same time, it's able to remain this kind of cold monolith that is protected behind these layers of bureaucracy and depersonalized system for processing people. With this in mind, by replacing her photograph with a self-portrait that's done in paint, Liu is able to present herself on her own terms. And I was thinking about how, like, the process of painting is one that involves so much of the body, like your arm moving across the canvas, in comparison to like taking a photo, which is just this one automated click. And so I think it's a much more warm and sort of personal and self-made way to present oneself, existing very interestingly in contrast with the sort of frozen, cold gaze of a camera wielded by a government official. So looking at Liu's work from the perspective of our own project and the work that Tara and I are trying to do, it just kind of made me reflect on how we can use our position as outsiders in these new places to draw connections between cultures, and then to give a voice, hopefully, to important stories and important movements that should be talked about. Which is not to compare our experience to, immigrants leaving a country of persecution and oppression, but how can your position as a newcomer help you draw connections between different cultures and, just tell a better story. So yeah, I had a lot of fun making this video. It was fun to put my little art history hat back on. Stay tuned for another one next week. It's gonna be a bit lighter, less communism, more bopping around the city. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, have a lovely week. Bye!